Chapter 4, Lesson 7, Writing Equations in Point-Slope Form, the last lesson in this chapter, where we talked about many ways that we can graph equations and also a couple different ways we can write equations. Today, there are two words, point and slope. So when we hear point, everyone say point, and slope, say slope. If they give you a point and slope, we're going to use this form. You can see on the slide just to the right for you guys, we're going to use this guy the entire time today. This is called point-slope form. It's very nice because if all they do is give you a point with some x value, x sub 1, that's going to go into this spot where the one with the sub 1, and y sub 1, which will go right in here. Yes, it has to go in there. Yes, you need the ones. Those questions came up in class. Very important. It has to go in this spot for the x. It has to go here for the y because then it works in the equation when we rewrite it for graphing. Otherwise, if you flip them, it's not quite right. And then has that slope of m. There's that letter m again. We've been talking about m as slope for a while in this chapter. Again, this is nice because when they say write in point-slope form, we're going to cross our fingers and hope and pray they gave us a point and a slope, which they did. So what you will do every time, yes, every time, you will write down y minus y sub 1, make it a little one, a subscript, m parentheses x minus x sub 1. From there, now go pick your point. Now remember, this one isn't so bad. X, then y. Just like in the alphabet, X comes first. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to write it on out as I see it. I work from left to right. So I'm going to do y minus, what is my y value here in this point? It's 2. So I want to put a 2 in. Equals, what is my m? What is my slope? All right, they gave us a mixed number. Let's just leave it like that because that's how they gave it to us. They gave it to us as 5 over 2. And then put that parenthesis, x minus, and then go and find what is your x value in your ordered pair and plug that on in. That is all you have to do. When it says to find or write in point-slope, you have written an equation in point-slope. We talked about it in class. Would you like to graph that? Not that form. Would you like to make a table out of that? No, not really. But when they give you a point-slope form, write an equation. That is an equation. Done. I don't expect you to do any other work because they said in point-slope, and this is point-slope. So once again, every time, y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x sub 1. When you've done that, remember, if you need to on your notes, put an x and then a y. So you remember that x comes first, then the y. So when I talk about what is your y value from your coordinate, from your ordered pair, put in that -6 equals the slope of -4/3, parentheses x minus what is your x value in your coordinate. Go back up there. That's where that 3 comes in. So -3, put the parenthesis. You're done. About the only thing I would do and the only time I would switch anything is here where they say don't subtract. Add the opposite. So if you wanted to, you could clean it up a little bit, and you would probably see me, and you will see the textbook rewrite it as y plus 6 equals a -4/3 times the quantity of x minus 3. Once again, write an equation in point-slope. You have successfully done that. That's it. That is the first half of the assignment usually. You just write them on in, and yes, every time I want to see this formula. On a quiz or test, it's going to be worth a point, so write it on in so that way you remember it, you get the point, you can sub in the problem right, and get the answers. Again, our whole thing is we want to be able to write an equation for a line in any line in the form of y equals mx plus b. So we're going to be doing that again today. But we're going to talk about just different ways to graph and different ways to write an equation. So here, now notice, here's the other half of the assignment. It says write in slope-intercept form. So part of me thinks the book wants us to start like this. y1, y minus y1. Don't write this in. They want us to do this, and then sub points in to find m, and then blah. Nope. Just undo that. I have this theory that if they say write in slope-intercept form, then let's do like we just did in a previous lesson. Let's do our 5 steps, where step 1 is to write down slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. Step 2 was to find your slope, find m. And that's where we wrote down that m equals slope, which usually we said was rise over run, but since there's no graph, I'm going to do the change in y over the change in x. Now notice, you could graph the entire thing. You could graph the 2 lines, 2 points, if you wanted to, and then you could do your rise over run. That is a method that works. You can graph them and then be able to look at them and do your rise over run. But since I don't have that and I don't want to show it to you that way, I'm going to do the change in y over the change in x. The change in y being the rise. How much did we go up and down? The run, the change in x. So pick a point. Doesn't matter which one you want to pick. Pick one of them. And I'm just going to circle up this guy because it doesn't have as many negatives. What is the y value in that one? So that's where we're going to have a 3 minus the y value in your other point here, which is 0. Again, that's going to go over the change in x. So go back to this point first, where we've got that 6 for an x value minus our x value in this other point, a -3. And here again would be about the only time where I would say don't subtract, add the opposite. And yes, there is no such thing as a -0. It's just 0. But out of habit's sake, adding that, so we can see that's 3 over 9, which simplifies down to 1/3. Step 3, you plug it on in. So y equals, now don't put an m, but what we just found are 1/3 x plus b. Now, in previous lessons, we were able to, option 1, see our y-intercept. So when we said find b, we could just see it to find b, or our y-intercept. Option 2 was where we were given a point that was 0 something, and they gave us our y-intercept. But today, they don't do that. So then that means you and I get to pick a point. I'm going to go back to this one that's highlighted in yellow. You can pick either one of them. I'm just going to stay away from the negatives. That's my only reason why. So then I want to plug in my y value. I'm going to plug in this into this step. So I'm just going to redo that problem down here, where instead of y, I'm going to put in a 3 equals, that's where I'm going to leave my 1/3. Now my x value of 6 plus some unknown value for b. That's where you can then quickly do some mental math, or just type it into a calculator. 1/3 of 6, well, 6 is 6 over 1. That just becomes 2. 2 plus b, 2 plus some number equals 3. So when we go ahead and quickly subtract 2 from both sides, or add a -2 rather, we get 1 equals b. And that leads us to step 5, where we begin to write it out. Y equals our m, which we found previously, so we're just going to copy down 1/3 x plus now that b, which we just found over here. And that's where we're going to plug in. And now we have written it in our slope-intercept form. When we talk slope-intercept form, there's usually going to be 5 steps to get there. There are other ways to get there, but that's how we're going to do it here. Now, when we look here, you are pulling down your kite at a rate of 2 feet per second. After 3 seconds, your kite is 54 feet above you. Write and graph an equation that represents the height, y, in feet. That's always nice to know. After x seconds. Go back and see what they did. Notice they sneakily gave you a slope and a point. The point, they told you some sort of information. At 3 seconds, it's at 54 feet tall. That's your point. Go ahead and write that on in so you can see that. Up here, they gave you a rate, the slope. What is the rate of change? That is your slope. So your m equals 2. Notice it says write and graph an equation. It doesn't say to write it in standard form. It doesn't say to write it in slope-intercept form. It doesn't say to write it in point-slope form. It just says write an equation. So all you need to do is write one. Might I recommend point-slope since they have given us a point and a slope. Thus, I'm going to write it on in just like you have to. Y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x sub 1. Now just rewrite it, plug it on in. Y minus your y value in your point, 54, equals your m, which was 2, parentheses x minus your x value of 3, which is perfect. And again, anytime they say write an equation, that is it. And that's wonderful. Then in class, someone's like, yeah, but we need to graph that. Yep. Yes, you do. Notice again, it says graph. Could you make a table? Yeah. Do you want to? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Could you use your intercepts? Could you plug in a 0 for, say, x and solve to see what y is? Yeah. Then you could plug a 0 in for y and solve for what x is. Yes, you can. There are many ways to solve this. Could you rewrite this equation so that it's in slope-intercept form? Yes. Yes, you can. The choice is yours. Let me briefly and very quickly show you both ways. To write this into slope-intercept form, all I'm going to do quickly here is, well, first, I'm going to distribute this guy. So I'm going to come over here and distribute that. That gives me 2x, but let me switch that to adding the opposite. So over here now, quick, I've got 2x plus a negative 6, and that equals y minus 54. So then quickly, just to get rid of that, I'm going to add 54 to both sides, because if you switched it to adding the opposite, since that's a negative 54, I'm going to add a positive 54 to both sides. Cross those out. Then you're left with y equals 2x plus 48. However, I have just found out I made a mistake. And I did this in class too, but someone caught it before we got down this far. Notice when we scroll back up, what was happening to the kite? We were pulling the kite down. When you're pulling it down, what type of slope is that going to give you? We need to make sure that's a negative 2. So watch what happens then. All you gotta do is sneak a negative 2 in down here, and that doesn't change anything. However, when we go back to the equation then, that gives me a negative 2x, which is what I should have. But then when I distribute a negative 2 to this guy, who's now negative, that gives me a positive 6, which means this guy down here should not be 48. When we add those together, you're going to find that this should come out correctly, and it'll be like the notes from class if you've already seen the PDF. That'll come out to be 60. Hey, look, another equation. You've written 2 equations for this one problem. How exciting! Would you like to write it? No, we don't. We're just going to keep moving on, right? But notice, either of these answers, they are an equation and this works. However, this guy over here, he's going to be a lot easier to graph. Notice we have a slope of -2 and we have to get to 60 for our y-intercept. In class we did 10s. We're going to number these and go every other one, but I'm going to go and make life a little easier for myself. I'm going to count by 5s for every line, but remember, to make my handwriting easier, I'm going to number every other. So this first one is 5, then 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. Now, you don't need to be putting these horizontal lines in like I am to show where these are at, where 60 is, or 65, or 70. I'm just doing it so that for notes purposes, in class and out of class, you can see where those 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 all coordinate with. Now, this is where, again, when we're trying to be very precise, it can be very tricky because we can get to 0, 60. That's not so bad. But then when we have to use our slope then, we're going to use -2/1, which means we're going to go down 2/1. So we need to, as best we can, get this at 1 and 58, and then go down 2/2, so that's at 56, and then down 2/1 at 54, and at 52. So you can see that my points don't actually line a perfect line there because it's so hard with the scale. But we can't count by 1s up to 60. That just doesn't work. Now, sometimes we talk about a break, and you could do that, but for simplicity's sake, we're just going to do that. Now, it said to graph, so please grab a straight edge and make a line connecting those points. And please remember that on the end of your line, there should always be arrows. There you have it. Now, as I said, I was going to show you another way, so let me back on up. You could have subbed in and found your intercepts. So very quickly, don't write this on in, but we had this equation. We had y minus 50 equals a -2, remember, because the kite was going down, parentheses x plus 3. So you could have plugged a 0 in for any of them, like in for x. So then you would have had your y minus 54 equals a -2. And then what's 0 minus 3, or 0 plus a -3? Well, that gives me a -3. Cross these guys out. -2 times a -6 gives me, -2 times a -3 gives me a +6. So I got y minus 54 equals that. So then I would then go plus 54, and look at that. My y-intercept is at 60. Then you could graph that like we already did. And then could you go back to this and do it again and write out y minus 54 equals -2x, -2 parentheses x minus 3, and then plug in a 0 for y, and then go through all the steps to find your x-intercept? Yes. When it says to write an equation, write whatever one you want. When it says graph, if it doesn't tell you how, use whatever method you like. Your slope-intercept form down here, your standard form using your intercepts, make a table. The choice is yours. But below this, you can see there's one more thing where it says, at what height was the kite flying before you began pulling it down? At what height was the kite before you started pulling it down? Well, when we go through this, remember, before we started, what was it? Where was it at initially? Well, it didn't tell us that, but you can go back to the graph and you can see that you had your first point at 0, 60, What is your y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept is at 60. So then your y-intercept tells you that it was at 60. Label, 60 feet. In class, someone else talked about another method. They said, well, wait, if the kite's going down 2 feet every second, and we've gone for 3 seconds, well, they just said, okay, well, then that means I'm going to take 2 times 3, which gives me 6. So let's just add 6 back to 54. That gives me 60. Yes, that math works great as well. You can, excuse me, you can look at the graph and find it out. You can do math. We could also do that if we couldn't see very well on the graph. We could go down to either of these equations and find out what our y-intercept was. So again, like we did on this previous one, you could plug in a 0 for x, because then that would give us what our y-intercept was, what we started at. Many different ways to get there. So if the instructions don't specifically tell you how to do it, then do it whatever way you'd like the best. Please note again on your assignment, when we're talking about this today, you're going to find that you're going to write half of your assignment in point slope, and then they're going to ask you to write equations in y equals mx plus b, which is our 5 steps to get to it, to write it in slope-intercept form. Read the instructions. If they tell you to use a certain method or a certain way to write it, then do that. If all they say is write an equation, then do what you would like.